All right, class, greetings and welcome to week number 3. That is right, week number 3 of your 9407 class, which is your intellectual freedom class. As always, I'm your professor, Dr. J.S.K. Alston, and what we are going to be doing this week in this check-in video is first we're going to start off by doing a quick state of the course update, and that will include some feedback that I have on the discussion board prompt that you all did last week. There are a few things that I want to say. I found your responses, I don't want to say intriguing because they weren't totally unexpected, but there are some things that I want to say in relation to some of the things that you all said, and I'm going to say a few brief things about our subject matter for this week. So we're going to go ahead and dive on in. Again, as you all know, you can always speed these up, and hopefully at the end of our video today, what we are going to feel is just a more nuanced sort of position as to what ALA is and what they actually do. So let's go ahead and jump into that. First of all, I do want to say that pretty much everybody, actually I think 100% everybody who did not need an extension and who did not contact me needing an extension did get their discussion board prompts up in time. So I am very, very pleased with that. Keep up the good work. Again, if you need extensions, you need to reach out to me and let me know. For discussion boards, you need to let me know ahead of time, because if I hear from you after the discussion board prompt is due, saying that you need an extension, it's going to be too late for that. I do give some leeway with other types of assignments, more formal assignments, but for the discussion board prompts, get it in before the due date, or get it in by the due date, or tell me before the due date that you will not be able to get it in on time and you need an extension. So having said that, yes, everybody is off to a pretty good start because everybody has done the work that is required thus far. I do want to note that our sync session is going to be toward the end of the month. September the 26th actually is going to be our sync session, so you still have a few weeks before we do our first sync session in this course. But be on the lookout for participating in that sync session. We are going to be joined by comedian Leanne Lord, and I think you all are going to find her both funny and enlightening as far as what she says regarding intellectual freedom within comedy. So having said that, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about some of the things that you all were saying on the discussion boards last week. Pause. All right, so if anybody is experiencing any sort of little memory loss, which is understandable because I know that a lot of stuff is flying at a lot of us at any given time, last week our prompt was related to the First and 14th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution and how these amendments work in tandem in order to protect freedom of speech and other First Amendment freedoms as guaranteed. One thing that I was seeing pretty much over and over again within the comments this semester, and again, this was not unexpected, but it's also not how things shake out every single semester. So I'm always interested in seeing exactly what's happening with the students in any given semester. Hold on for a second. So what I found as I was looking at your discussion board prompts last week was that there was not a consensus, but there was certainly an overwhelming majority of you who were pretty much taking the ALA guidelines and ALA Bill of Rights and all of those things, and you were pretty much taking them for gospel and saying, hey, this is what ALA says and this is how it should be. And I will say that most library school students are indeed free speech absolutists, which is the side of free speech that you all were pretty much landing on. And I will also say that when I was in library school, I was also a freedom of speech, free speech absolutist. I believe that anything that was not unprotected within the First Amendment, so anything that had First Amendment protections should be allowed in a library, should have a platform if somebody called for it to have a platform, and that anything that was allowed by the First Amendment should have a home in libraries. That's how I felt in library school, and that's how I felt until I advanced in my career a little bit. And what you will find is that a lot of veteran librarians are actually not free speech absolutist the way a lot of students are, because after a few years of practice, you see a few things, you realize that the First Amendment actually does allow for a lot to be said and a lot to be published. And there are going to be some things that you just don't see a need to have in your library. And we are going to revisit this a lot of times throughout the semester. It is a huge topic within our field. But just as some examples, so again, a lot of you were saying, okay, well, if it's protected by the First Amendment, then it should be in the library. The library shouldn't restrict, the library shouldn't censor, this, that, and the other. And so a lot of you were saying, yes, even if there is a controversy, you have to have both sides, because that is how ALA is kind of framing things, that you have to have all sides of the controversy and that sort of thing, and that all perspectives should be heard and should be available, again, as long as they are protected by the First Amendment. Now, here's where that gets a little funny. A lot of times when we talk about teach the controversy, we're usually teaching the controversy as far as evolution. That's where you hear that term. So you hear a lot of people say, well, libraries should carry both things that say that evolution is a fact, as well as things that say creationism is a fact or creationism is valid, and you should allow the controversy to be taught. Okay. Now, certainly a lot of people within academia are very much against that approach because, hey, let's just keep it real. Evolution at this point is a proven fact. We have observed it. We can observe it with microorganisms because microorganisms reproduce so quickly. So we know that evolution is a fact. So when we have creationist materials, a lot of times creationist materials will also sort of say that evolution is a fact in their own little way. They'll say that, God guided evolution and those sorts of things, and that's all good. But when you have creationist materials that say that evolution isn't a fact, or that there is still a controversy surrounding evolution, again, we've seen it. We can actually observe microorganisms evolve because their generation spans so quickly. Okay? So there really isn't a controversy to be taught there. Evolution, again, is a proven fact. So if you have materials that are saying that evolution is not a proven fact, do those materials really belong in a library if they are spreading falsehoods? A lot of you were saying yes. I'm going to err on no. And again, just because ALA says something does not mean that it has to be done the way ALA says. There are a lot of librarians out there who don't even pay ALA dues and refuse to join ALA because they do not feel that ALA does, in fact, serve librarians adequately. So I do understand that as students, yes, you all defaulted to, well, ALA says this, therefore this is that. But that is not the general feeling of a lot of veteran librarians. A lot of veteran librarians do have an issue with ALA and feel that ALA is out of touch. So that's the main thing that I want to happen as a result of this recording. I do not want you all to leave this class thinking that ALA is the authority and that ALA cannot be wrong. You will see that a lot of librarians think that ALA is wrong about a lot of things. And ALA has, in fact, revised some of their previous documents because they felt that, yes, librarians were right and ALA's position was dated and ALA needed to update their position. Now, we can take this a step further. So, with me being a black man, and I don't shy about my race, I talk about it openly, especially in this intellectual freedom class, but I talk about it openly elsewhere as well. And so there are materials that just quite frankly, any library that I'm an admin for, you're not going to see those materials in my library because even though they are protected by the First Amendment, they are still spreading falsehoods or they are spreading dangerous ideas that I think can bring about detriment to a community. And so I use my blackness as an example here. There are two books that I have mentioned. I actually mentioned them in a reply to one of your classmates last week, but I can mention them also as fodder for this discussion here. For those of you who haven't heard of these two books, they are extremely racist in content, but they take scientific racist approaches as well as historical racist approaches and try to validate their racism through history and science. These two books I'm talking about on the scientific tip are The Bell Curve, and then on the historical tip are The Negro in the World Crisis. And there are libraries that hold both of those books, but no library that I would ever admin would hold either of those books. The Bell Curve spreads ideas that are not scientifically disproven, unfortunately, but there still is an ongoing debate about what the Bell Curve asserts related to race, in relation to race and intelligence. And so I think that having the Bell Curve in the library for a lot of communities can actually be more harm than good. Okay, and then when it comes to the Negro in the World Crisis, yes, they are making historical arguments as to how the existence of sub-Saharan Africans or Black people throughout the country throughout the world is creating issues related to crime, related to famine, related to war, government corruption, and all sorts of things like that. And again, the Negro in the World Crisis is held in, I think, a few dozen libraries throughout the country. It's not widely held, but it is held throughout a few libraries. I will say, though, that every holding that I've seen for the Negro in the World Crisis has been an academic library, and you don't see that in public libraries. And yes, the reason for that is because of potential community uproar. And yes, if some sheltered person from ALA who has not been a practicing librarian in decades came to me as a library admin and told me, well, it would only be right for you to have the Negro in the World Crisis in your collection because, yes, there is a controversy. Some people think that Black people are inferior. Some people think that Black people aren't inferior. And as long as there's a controversy, you have to provide materials for the controversy. I'm going to flip you the bird and tell you to go on about your business. That's not how I conduct business, okay? Now, with Black people, I've noticed that the controversy or teach the controversy seems to be a little more loose and people do buy into it. But if there is a class, and I say this as somebody who's a Noahide, so Noahidism is an offshoot of Judaism. But what I will say is, whereas they will have the debate as far as, well, maybe slavery was a good thing, or maybe Black people are inferior because their average IQs are less than average IQs for whites and for Asians, you know? People will do that and say that there is a controversy and therefore a discussion to be had. It's me at 40 years old, being a Black man for 40 years, I will tell you straight up, it's not a discussion, and I'm willing to have at this point. If you believe it, you can go ahead and believe it elsewhere. I'm not going to try to convince you otherwise. But whereas people say that these types of discussions are okay, one thing that I never see anyone say, okay, it is okay to have the discussion, or rarely, I shouldn't say never, but rarely, is when it comes to Judaism and Holocaust denial. And that's another thing. I would never have Holocaust denial materials in any library that I was in charge of. I would not have Mein Kampf in any library, any public library that I was in charge of. Now, academic, yes, there may be a reason why you would have Mein Kampf in an academic library, but in a public library, no way. And then Holocaust denial materials, any book that says the Holocaust didn't happen is a book that is spreading falsehoods and also spreading hate. And no, I would not allow it in my library, even though those materials are technically protected by the First Amendment. So almost all of you fell into this belief that, yes, you have to teach the controversy, you have to have all sides. And yet I believe, no, I could be wrong about this, but I personally believe that if I said to you all, okay, so let's just have a bunch of Holocaust denial books in the library written by David Duke and written by Jared Taylor and all these other people, then I think a lot of you who say, well, yes, you have to have the controversial materials that present all sides of an argument, I bet when it came to Holocaust denial, a lot of you would change your tune. And that's what I'm saying, is that no, ALA is not always right. And yes, ALA pretty much does have the position of, yes, you've got to have the controversy well represented. So you've got to have those Holocaust denial books in your collection as well. And I say, screw that. I say that's something that ALA is wrong about. and their opinion on that is dated. So I'm going to leave that part right there and go into just a few words about what we are discussing for this week. Give me one moment. All right, so now that you all have bared with me on that particular nugget of what's going on in our intellectual freedom class, let's talk a little bit about what's going on with our discussion board prompt this week, and then I'll also say a few words about an announcement that I put in the class earlier this evening. So when it comes to this week and what we're talking about, so for the next 3 weeks, we're going to be talking about limitations to freedom of speech. So just because the First Amendment does grant freedom of speech and the 14th Amendment extends that freedom by saying that the states and local municipalities and local counties also cannot limit freedom of speech, there is case law that has determined that there is speech that is of such low value that that speech would not be protected either. So there are certain forms of speech that, even though we have the First Amendment that's supposed to be protecting forms of speech and giving us freedom of speech, there is case law that said, well, hey, there are limitations to the First Amendment's freedom of speech guidelines. And so what we're talking about this week, as far as those limitations, are obscenity, fighting words, and true threats. So these are 3 examples of speech that are not protected by the First Amendment, and that does mean that governments can pass laws that forbid these types of speech and expression. So we'll start out with true threats first, because that's kind of an obvious one, and I doubt that there's anyone who would disagree that true threats should not be protected by the First Amendment. So if I do walk up to you and say, I'm going to blow your brains out, that is a threat, right? And let's say that you actually see a gun on my waist as I say that. You are going to feel threatened. This is something that is going to have some sort of adverse mental effect on you. And because of that, because it's something that could get you, it could make you afraid, it could make you nervous, it could cause you to react in a certain way that could be harmful to both of us. Because of that, yes, the Supreme Court has determined that true threats are of such low value that they do not merit First Amendment protections, okay? So yes, the federal government, as well as state governments and local governments, can pass laws saying that you are going to incur some sort of penalty if you threaten somebody. And we've seen these things in action. In fact, it wasn't too long ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, that the FBI actually did arrest a person for having threatening comments toward President Joe Biden on their Twitter feed, okay? And the reason why the FBI was able to arrest somebody for having threats toward Biden on their Twitter feed was because true threats are not protected. Now, fighting words. This is very important because a lot of times people get fighting words and hate speech mixed up. Hate speech is protected by the First Amendment. You are allowed to say hateful things according to the First Amendment. However, fighting words are not protected by the First Amendment, and this is due to the New Hampshire v. Chaplinsky versus New Hampshire case that you all are going to read about within your reading materials this week. So let me say this, there's a distinction between fighting words and hate speech, and the distinction has to deal with what is going to happen in the immediate aftermath of the speech, okay? So there's hate speech out there, but not all hate speech is going to result in an immediate breach of the peace. And the bell curve actually is an example of that. The bell curve exists. We know that the bell curve exists. We know that libraries hold the bell curve. Just because the bell curve exists doesn't mean that its existence is going to cause an immediate breach of the peace among the public. There's a bell curve book laying around somewhere, and people are just going about their business and not becoming violent just because the bell curve exists. However, there are quote unquote fighting words that exist. And if you utter these fighting words, there could be an immediate breach of the peace. And I'm going to, again, kind of go personal with this because it does show to be a good example. Now, don't get me wrong. If you come to my face and call me a nigger, that is indeed hate speech as well, per my definition. Now, there is no federal definition, but I think pretty much anyone would say, yeah, if you go up to a black man's face and tell him, go back to Africa, you nigger, that is 99% of people are going to call that hate speech, right? But that is also going to be fighting words. If you get into a black person's face and call them the N-word, there is a good chance that black person is going to respond by slapping you or punching you or doing something violent toward you. Now, when that happens, you are not necessarily going to be able to rely on, but my freedom of speech, I have the freedom to say that because of the First Amendment. No, you don't. Fighting words are considered to be of such low value that they are not protected speech. So yes, municipalities and states can and have passed laws saying that if you say certain things to people and they react in a certain way, you are not going to be protected because of your freedom of speech. That person might not get charged, or you might get charged with something. And there is an ethnic intimidation statute in my home state of North Carolina that doesn't allow you to say certain things that could be considered quote unquote ethnically intimidating. All right. The last thing that I want to speak on really quick is the obscenity piece. We have a really good video about obscenity within your course materials this week, so please go ahead and watch that. In fact, it's required, so yes, you do need to watch it. But a lot of times people, I think, just don't even understand legally what obscenity is, because there's a dictionary definition to obscenity, and then there's an actual legal definition for obscenity. And what we are concerned with in this class is the legal definition of obscenity, okay? And you're gonna get a great breakdown for what the legal definition of obscenity is in this week's reading materials, and that should help you better understand what obscenity is and why it is not protected, okay? So we are going to leave all those things alone now and then just talk a little bit about the upcoming debate, which again, I am going to be drafting some of you all potentially to participate in if I don't get enough volunteers. So you saw this announcement in the course. I placed it there tonight. So hopefully by the time you're watching this video, if you are watching it, you have seen this announcement. The first year that I taught intellectual freedom, we only had 6 students participate in the debate. So it was 3 for, 3 opposed. But last semester, we actually had, not last semester, last fall, we actually had so many students that wanted to do the debate that I actually allowed for it to be 4 on 4 instead of 3 on 3. But we are going to need for it to be at least 3 on 3, okay? So what we're going to have is once we get either 6 or 8 of you, we are going to have 2 groups. One of the groups is going to debate in favor of hate speech being protected by the First Amendment, and hate speech is protected by the First Amendment in the United States. However, in Western Europe, hate speech is generally unprotected speech, and you could be subject to criminal sanctions, including fines and brief imprisonments if you are found to have committed hate speech. I don't know exactly how you say it in those European countries, but if you have uttered hate speech, you could be subject to criminal liability in Western Europe. And so there's going to also be a group that is opposed to hate speech being fully protected by the First Amendment, and the debate is going to occur there. That debate is going to take place on November 28th during our Zoom session. The rest of the class is going to watch you all debate, and there's going to be an anonymous survey that allows the class to decide, okay, who won the debate, who quote unquote won the debate. And I will say that there has been a clear winner in the previous iterations of the course, but whether you win or lose, you still get the full points as long as your teammates say that you are a good debate partner, okay? And aside from that, what's going to happen is probably on September the 11th, I'm going to announce who the debate teams are, and then I'm going to create Canvas spaces for each of the debate teams. And from there, I'm going to check in with you all periodically throughout the semester up until November 28th to just make sure you're on track, to see if you need anything, to give you all the procedures of how the debate is actually going to take place, because I do have procedures drawn up and we followed the procedures in the previous iterations of the course. This time around, we only have 50 minutes in class instead of an hour and 15 minutes in class. What I'm thinking I'm going to ask you all to do is kind of stick around voluntarily if you want, so that we can make the debate maybe an hour as opposed to just 50 minutes. But we do want to have time to go through everything procedurally, okay? So if you are interested in participating in the debate, by all means, go ahead and email me, austinj@missouri.edu, any place, anytime, any town. And again, I might end up on a first come, first serve, but I am thinking that what I want to do is give people a chance to kind of come in. And if I feel that there's going to be better synergy with somebody who emailed me after the original 6 or the original 8 emailed me, if I feel that they're going to be a better participant within the debate than some of the people that emailed me before them, then I'm going to go ahead and choose that person. But yes, we're going to end up with at least 6 of you and no more than 8 of you participating in this debate. And again, those of you who participate will not have to do the final paper. This will serve as your final assignment. So I hope everything is clear. I hope you sped this up. And I hope you found this a little interesting or a little context setting. And that's really all I have to say at this point. So yes, let's stop it here before we reach 30 minutes. Again, I hope you sped it up. I am Dr. Jace, and we can talk about all sorts of things in this space because this is an intellectual freedom class. I will see you all next week, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all in the discussion board prompts as well. All right, talk to you later.